Yo, what's going on? It's your boy Ghost here, and today I'm bringing us another Warzone 3 video. And today we're going to be talking about the new meta loadouts after the Season 5 Reloaded update. A lot of interesting changes were made in this update, some kind of surprising, some not so much. But today we're going to be deep diving into what are the new best loadouts after the update. But before we get into this video, I want to say if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button on the road to 6,000. And also, if you enjoy this video or find it helpful, hit that like button. But with that being said, let's get into it. And for our first weapon, we have the STG, which some of you guys may find this unfortunate. Some of you guys may be, still chilling. But this gun did receive a nerf in this update. However, it was very, very minimal in my opinion, because it didn't really address what makes this gun so powerful. The max damage got nerfed from 36 to 32, which I don't think that's that big of a deal. Maybe that's like 1-2 extra bullets. But really, the biggest thing about this gun is the headshot multiplier. And I think if they wanted to balance this weapon out a little bit or address it properly, they would have had to have nerfed the headshot multiplier. But this gun is still going to be absolutely dominant. I would say this is still going to probably be the best primary in the game. Now, there is two other weapons in this patch that are going to, I'm curious to see how they're going to play out. And I'm going to talk about them in this video for sure, because they got significantly buffed. And I see a pathway for this to be the top 3 primaries. But this gun's still probably going to be the top of those top 3, just because of how good it is and just everything about it. And to be honest, I'm a little confused on what direction they want to go with this weapon. I'm not sure if they want to keep it meta for the entire Season 5, because judging by this update, they don't really seem to be that urgent about changing it. So I would have to assume that they want to keep it at least until the end of Season 5. But if they end up nerfing this gun like 2 weeks from now, because they typically do that when they fumble a nerf, then we're going to be like, okay, well, why didn't you just do it in Season 5 Reloaded? So I was curious to see how this gun's going to play out. For now, though, it's going to be more than likely the best primary. And, yeah, man. But with that being said, let's move on to the next weapon. And for our next weapon, we have the Striker, which, to be honest, I have this as the new meta SMG coming into Season 5 Reloaded. Now, the static got nerfed pretty significantly. I know that sometimes those nerfs don't really mean nothing. They can have this whole paragraph length of nerfs that they do, and it still not be enough. So I'm curious to see how the static's can perform after this update, but judging just off the patch notes and what it got nerfed, I think the static is definitely going to be out of the meta now, in a gun like the Striker, which is already a weapon that was already on its heels, will be able to take over the meta. Because to be honest, there is a lot of good SMGs, but I feel like the Striker is going to be the one to take the meta spot. Now, I know like the Striker 9 is pretty solid, the Wasp 9 is still pretty good. Obviously, the Super is still pretty good, but the damage drop off on that's pretty crazy. Then we have the static, and I feel like the Striker is in line now to become the next meta. It also got buffed in this update. Nothing too crazy. It was just like range aspects that got buffed, which already helps this gun a lot, because this gun's pretty good at every range. And for it to get a little bit more range, I think it's gonna be pretty significant. And that's what the gun like this. Like this class setup was putting in work at every range. And this doesn't have no high velocity, it doesn't have no barrel. It was putting in work. So if you have not used it, bro, definitely try it out in this update. I think you're gonna not be disappointed. It's gonna be one, if not one of the more like sleeper come ups for this game, because this gun's been like this for a minute now. So I'm hoping that it's gonna happen. Like this should be the time the Striker gets some meta attention. But we're gonna have to wait and see. But with that being said, let's move on to the next weapon. And for our next weapon, we have the Pull-Me-Out LMG, which is kind of an interesting weapon today, because this gun, if you guys haven't been paying attention, there was a brief period of time where every major update, this gun seemed to get nerfed in just little aspects. Like, oh, we're gonna nerf the damage range, we're gonna nerf the fire rate, we're gonna nerf certain multipliers. Today, though, they went crazy and dropped a huge buff on this gun that addressed the damage, the mobility, and just overall like rate of fire, which is kind of crazy, because I wouldn't have expected them to try to revamp this weapon this late into the game. And last time that I used this weapon, where I dropped my PR, this gun was killing it. So I know that this gun, even through all those nerfs, was still really, really good. And for them to come out and buff it significantly like they did today is very interesting, because I would say this gun is a top 3 gun in the game now. It was already really good, and I have high praise for LMGs, because I know a lot of LMGs are still really good despite them getting nerfed, getting taken out of meta. They've still been really, really good, and I would argue that the Pull-Me-Out is going to make a case for a top 3 primary in the game. And even if the SCG gets nerfed early on this season, if they decided to mess up that nerf today and they decide to nerf it later, I would not be surprised if this gun comes back into the meta. If you guys remember, beginning of the game, this gun was meta. Pretty interesting meta, was very, very broken. I'm not going to say it's going to be to that extent, because I feel like obviously it's not what it was before. but it's still going to be really, really good enough to potentially substitute in for meta moving down the line. Curious how they're handling this weapon. It's very, very interesting. But hey, they're getting it done. Gonna definitely be excited to use this weapon this after this update because I haven't used it in a minute and I want to see how much better it is now because it got a significant buff and I want to see if it can compete with the STG because if it could somehow take over the STG spot, despite the fact that STG didn't get nerfed that much, that's gonna be kind of crazy. So curious to see how this all gonna play out. I think some of the changes, although they were kind of minimal, they made some interesting ones, interesting enough to spice up the conversation at least. I think that's the least they can do, and I'll take that. So with that being said, move on to the next weapon. And for our next weapon, we have the FJX Horus, which I felt kind of weird putting over the static, but again, I feel like the static's nerf is going to do enough to take it out of like the best SMG conversation, and even maybe the second best SMG, because this FJX obviously, arguably still a top three, was a top three, still is a top three SMG coming into this update, didn't get changed. And for the static to get nerfed the way it did, now I'm not saying it's going to be completely terrible. The gun's still going to be probably solid, still be probably competitive. And if anything, best case scenario here, we're walking into a 3 SMG meta, which I am completely for it. I would love for it to be multiple gun meta. That's one of my favorite times in this game. My favorite personal like half season was season 3 Reloaded when we had the wall sign and striking on his metas. That was the fun, like the funnest for me, honestly. And then we followed it up with the FJX and Supri meta the following update. So very curious to see if that's going to play out the way I hope it does. I wouldn't expect it though, but even if like the static is not necessarily competitive to this or like a striker, we could at least have like a striker FJX meta. So I'm cool with dual metas. You know what I'm saying? I'm cool with multiple gun metas. I personally enjoy it when it's like that. And like I said, I think the static, especially for how early it's been in its life cycle, I don't think it's gonna be completely out. I would argue it's still gonna probably be a top 3 SMG, competitive enough to just compete with these weapons, but not be better than them by a long shot. And I think that's probably the best way to handle the weapon. Again, though, we're gonna have to wait and see. Curious to see how this next week's gonna play out with all these changes. I would have to applaud them because I think they actually made some pretty solid changes this time around to at least spice up the conversation for the remainder of the season. Hopefully, they can build off that in season 6 once we get there. Because I know season 5 was kind of whack, especially with the primaries. But this time, I gotta applaud them because they actually did, in my opinion, a pretty good job with these weapon changes. But with that being said, let's move on to the next weapon. And last but not least, we have the MCW. Now, this could be considered like another secondary added onto this list or just another AR, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, it is technically in the AR category. So we're going to put it in place for a primary. Now, this weapon, yet again, received another buff in the Season 5 Reloaded update. I think that's the total now is 7, which is absolutely ridiculous because the primary or just the normal version of this weapon, in my opinion, despite it getting all those buffs, not only is it not meta, but I can make an argument that it's not even a top 3 primary in the game, which is absolutely ridiculous because they literally have been so hell bent on buffing that weapon every update, and they just have not made it good enough to be like one of the best guns in the game. And it's ridiculous because at some point they should have just been like, you know what? Let's just make it so it's the best gun in the game, period. Like, they're going so hard for it that I'm surprised they haven't done that. And again, I think they fumbled it completely because, like I said, with all the changes that happened to some of these primaries, the SCG remaining still like amazing, and then the pulling me out becoming way better. I just don't see how this MCW was going to come in and just take those spots. But I will say, the silver lining of this, that with this buff, the conversion kit gets a lot better now. This gun has been insane. This conversion kit has been insane this entire time. Every buff that it gets, it's just made this conversion kit way better. And to be honest, if the MCW just normal version doesn't become a meta as a primary, the best way this gun becomes meta is through the secondary class. Again, the static gets nerfed, the conversation is going to be kind of up in the air, more experimentation is going to be held, and that may allow for this conversion kit to become potentially the secondary meta. We're going to have to wait and see. I'm personally very excited to use this gun after this update because I know it's going to be hidden. Last time that I used it, it was going crazy. So I just know with this buff, it's just got even better. And I cannot wait to get my hands on this. So like I said, if the MCW just normal version doesn't become meta, which it probably won't, the best way really is going to be a secondary version of the weapon, which is really funny because it's an AR and the only way it became meta was through secondary. But we've seen it before. The XM4 back in Cold War, like Warzone, that Warzone iteration, that used to be a secondary. This gun could be just like that, which would be very interesting to see. And again, the experimentation is going to be kind of crazy this next week. I feel like there's a lot of conversations to be had with these updates. And again, I applaud them for the update that they dropped today because it spices things up. And I like it when they do that. So with that being said, if you did enjoy this video, again, hit that like button and go get these dubs with these classes. Peace.